démarrer.
Okay, it's done. Thank you, Zing. The SCOR Foundation for Science is pleased and has the honor to introduce today Pierre-André Chiappori, who will address in this webinar the topic of the influence of changing family structures on wealth and inequalities, with a special reference, of course, to the situation in the US, where numerous economists have already pointed an explosion of inequalities. Pierre-André Chiappori should not be unknown for you. He is the current chairman of the SCOR Foundation, member of SCOR Global Life America's board and of SCOR Ray US board, whose risk committee he is chairing. He is graduated from French École Nationale Supérieure on mathematics. He got a PhD in economics at the University of Paris Panthéon-La Sorbonne. He is currently Roman and Barbara Steinschneider Professor of Economics at Columbia University, member of the French Academy of Moral and Political Sciences, so as Denis Kessler was, and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Pierre-André Chiappori will present the most recent results of his research on the evolution of family structures and its contribution, to wealth and income inequalities, a dimension of inequalities too often neglected by economists. Also, as we will discover, it plays a substantial role. He will more especially focus on one structural evolution, i.e. the fact that marriage are increasingly taking place between people of the same education, a key evolution for understanding not only the forces that are behind the recent increase in inequalities, but also the coming trends of the life insurance and the life reinsurance business, therefore very key for insurance and reinsurance business. As you are accustomed to, the webinar will last at maximum 90 minutes from 2:30 to 4 p.m. Paris time, If you have understanding questions, please ask your question as you go during the presentation of Pierre-André. For substantive question to the opposite, please ask them at the end of the presentation. Pierre-André, thank you so much to have accepted to make this presentation. You have now the floor, let us say for 40 to 60 minutes, depending on your O1 presentation and on how much time you need. Thereafter, we will open the discussion with the audience and we will close the webinar when questions will have been exhausted and at latest at 4 p.m. Thank you, Pierre-André. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Let me start. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start with two caveats. First of all, the title is slightly different from what has been announced. Wealth is replaced by human capital. The fact is, when we think about wealth, we tend to think about financial wealth. And one of the main point I'm going to make here is that a huge fraction, actually a dominant fraction of wealth takes the form of human capital. And the second thing is I'm not going to present exclusively my work, thankfully. I'm going to present a bunch of recent work on the topic made all over the place. So I just want to stress some trends which I think are extremely important, not only for the insurance business, by the way, but also for the economy in general. I will, the consequences of what I'm going to say in terms of insurance, this is something that I would gladly leave for discussion, if only because I'm sure that in the audience, there are many people who are more competent than I am on this particular topic. Okay, so let me start with inequality. And as you know, there has been a lot of work on inequality, but in particular, there has been a book by Piketty and then a series of articles by Piketty, Emmanuel Sales, Gabriel Zuckman, and others on concentrating on one particular aspect of inequality, which is the top 1%. How much of the total income goes to the top 1%, or sometimes the top 0.1% of the income distribution. And if you remember the story, the story is R larger than G, meaning essentially that if the interest rate exceeds the growth rate of the economy, then wealthy people become even wealthier and so on and so forth. So the story looks a little bit like this. This guy here presumably belongs to the top 1%, and obviously this guy does not. And this is the kind of Piketty, Saez-Zuckman story. Well, first of all, this has been recently challenged. There is a very interesting paper which actually appeared about 3-4 years ago, but has been recently published in the JPE by Houghton and Splinter.
Please.
So the recent paper by Houghton and Spindler. Those people are working for the budget office or the tax office. So they have redone all the computation by Piketty, Saez-Zuckman, but using slightly different assumption on income. And when you look at the top 1%, one thing that's very clear is that the mere definition of the so. What you have here on the left-hand side is the pre-tax income. On the right-hand side, you have the post-tax income. And what you see is that by the computation of Houghton and Splinter, this huge increase of the share going to the top 1% does not exist. Essentially, what we see in their computation in terms of post-tax income, the level in 2010 is pretty much the same as in 1960. I don't want to enter into this discussion. This is an incredibly technical discussion, and both sides are very competent, very honest economists. You know, it's just that the topic is very complicated. However, there is a downside to all this, which is this discussion has been totally concentrated on the top 1%. And my take on this is that's the wrong question. The problem, the most important problem, and that's actually what I'm going to talk about during this presentation, is definitely not the top 1%. It's everybody else. It's the remaining 99%. So what I'm going to talk about is the inequality, with the exception of the top 1%. Let me leave those guys aside, and the evolution since the war, and more importantly, since the 1980s. So let me give you a few facts. First of all, inequality has been increasing since the 80s in many countries. Not in France, though, but now you got different scenarios. In a country like China, there has been a very significant increase in inequality, at least at the beginning of the huge growth that was triggered by the reforms. But the scenario was wealth has increased and income has increased for everybody. Yet it has increased slightly faster at the top than at the bottom, which resulted in an increase in inequality. But the increase in inequality was accompanying a general increase in wealth. That's not the case for the US. In the case of the US, what we see is an increase at the top. I will give you some data in a minute, but there is an increase in the top, but there is a stagnation, if not a decline, at the bottom of the distribution. And that's extremely worrying. Let me put a grain of optimism here. This was true at least until 2010. Over the last decade, over the last 15 years, there has been a reversal of this, and I will come to that later. The next point I want to make is, if we want to understand this increase in inequality, we need to concentrate on the notion of human capital. This is the definition of the human capital as given by the World Bank. My main claim, and actually it's not my claim, it's the claim of, I would say, most economists, is that starting in 1980, the value of human capital has been increasing a lot. And all the changes in inequality, plus a lot of additional changes that has been triggered by this, can be explained in terms of this huge increase in the value of human capital. Now, human capital, it's education, but it's not only education. A large part of human capital are things that you acquire during your lifetime by continuous training, by learning on the job, and so on. It plays a key role for inequality, but also for growth. We know that growth is long-term growth is linked to technical innovation, and technical innovation is obviously an outcome of human capital. Human capital is an investment. That's in the key intuition of Becker in the late 70s. In other words, you invest into your human capital in the sense that when you take, for instance, when you register in a university, you pay a tuition. More importantly, you forego some income that you could have received during that period. So you give up some current income in order to increase the future income. So that's exactly the definition of investment. And the thing that I'm going to talk about at the end, which is my area of research, is the role of the family in this evolution. Okay, I will start with facts, and I will just give you a bunch of diagrams that will illustrate those facts. A series of facts will talk about the evolution of inequality. Next, I will talk about the role of human capital in inequality. I will talk a little bit about the general process of urbanization and growth. Then I will try to explain this increase in the value of human capital. And as you will see, a very simple story in terms of supply and demand, which, as you know, are the bread and butter of economists, does work pretty well. And in the end, I will talk about family investment into human capital. Okay, so let me start with the facts. This here is, I'm going to talk mostly about the US, as Philippe said, just because most of my work has been on US data, although I've been working a little bit on China and some developing countries, but I'm going to talk mostly about the US. So this is the evolution of real family income between the war and the mid or late 70s. What in France we call the Trente Glorieuses, the three glorious decades. Now, there are two things to see there. The first one is this very impressive increase. Essentially, real family income doubles over a period of 30 years. And, you know, there are not so many examples in history in which you see a doubling of family income over this short period. But the second thing, which is even more remarkable, is that here you don't have a graph. In fact, you have three graphs, because there is a graph for the top of the distribution, the middle of the distribution, and the bottom of the distribution, except that basically you see only one, just because the increase has been, this is a base of 173, the increase has been exactly the same, the rate of increase has been exactly the same all over the population. There has been a huge increase, and everybody has benefited from this increase in exactly the same proportions. And then that's what I call the diffraction of the 80s. Starting in the 80s, what you see is that at the top, in the 95th percentile, there is the increase. The increase continues. The trend is pretty much the same. It's slightly slower, but not much. The median income, the trend is much less pronounced. And at the bottom, for the bottom 20%, essentially we have a stagnation. So that's the first thing. Now, those are not the data an economist would like to use, because what you do here is that you take each year a snapshot. You look at the distribution of income at any given moment. Which means what? Which means that a person might be at the bottom of the distribution in 1 year, but much higher in the distribution the next year. There are lots of temporary shocks to income, which are incorporated like this. As economists, we should not be interested in current income. We should be interested in lifetime income, or more precisely what Milton Friedman used to call permanent income. Now, those are extremely difficult to measure. In France, it will be impossible to measure them. But thanks God, in the US, we have this incredible database, which is called the PSID, Panel Study of Income Dynamics. It's a panel that has been following now something like 15,000 people over basically 70 years. So one thing you can do is you can take, and this is the graphs which are there. Those are graphs by Gouvnen et al. If you take this point here, so first of all, for each person entering the job market in the late 50s, you can look at the total history of the future income of this person. You can compute the lifetime income by computing the discounted value, and you can create those deciles or those quantiles of the distribution in terms not of current, but of permanent or lifetime income. This is exactly what you have here. And you could do that for people entering the job market in 58, 59, and so on and so forth, until 93. Why 93? Because we need to observe them for 40 years to get an idea of their lifetime income. Now, what you see here is that if you look at the top of the distribution, this is the top decile. If you look at the person entering the job market at the top of the distribution in the late 50s, and you compare that to the lifetime income of someone entering the same labor market 25 years later, there is a very significant increase in lifetime income, something like 50%. But that's concentrated at the top. Even if you look at the 75th percentile, there is an increase at the beginning, but then it's flat. And after that, you see essentially something flat or even decreasing. If you look at the bottom 10%, the lifetime income of people entering the job market in the 80s is not larger in constant dollars than what it used to be in the 50s. That's the huge increase in inequality, and it's not current inequality, it's lifetime inequality. The picture for women is completely different, and that's due to something else, which is that over the period there has been a huge increase in education and labor market participation of women. I'll come back to that later. Now, those are the big picture. That's the increase of inequality that I've been talking about. What's the role of human capital? And let me start with the basic notion, which is what we call the college premium. The definition of the college premium is how much income do you get over and above what you would have gotten by entering the labor market with a high school degree if you acquire a university, a BA, a college, university degree. Remember that in the US, college is 4 years after graduation from high school. So the college premium is here, and this is computed between 72 and 2012 for men and women. By the way, it's not so easy the interpretation of those numbers is not straightforward. Those are raw numbers. So you take the median earning of the people with a college degree, and you compare that to the median earning of people with a high school degree, which has to be taken with some precaution because those are not the same people. So in other words, it's not clear that the people with the college degree, if they had not taken, yeah?
There's just one question from Jerry, coming from
Okay.
Jerry. How much is it in purchase, what you are saying in purchasing power parity, at least, or in real terms? Sorry, it's just a
so
pure technical.
All this is in real term, in the sense that it's corrected for inflation. PPP is a different question because now you have to give, it's a usual trick in economics. You need to give a value of our current smartphones back in the 50s when they did not exist. And actually when the mainframes that were taking an entire room were much less powerful than the stuff that's in our pocket. So the PPP is a very difficult question, and but all these are real. So all this is corrected for inflation. This is in constant dollars. This is the college premium. And what you see is that back in the 70s, if you look at men, back in the 70s, you did slightly better with a college degree than with a high school degree, but the increase was only 22%. Whereas back in 2012, it reaches 70%. So in other words, the premium has tripled over the period. It's slightly less for women for reasons that, in particular, those low numbers are linked to the Vietnam War, and we can discuss that. But there is no doubt that the value of education, at least when you measure it by the college premium, has been exploding over the period. By the way, this is a US phenomenon. It's true in some countries, like it's true in the UK. It will not be true in France. France will be a kind of different story, and we can come back later on this during the questions. Now, this is the same type of graph, but here there is a distinction between the bachelor degree, so this is 4 years after high school, and the advanced degree, so that beyond college. So this will be MD, PhD, mass MBAs, low degree, this kind of stuff. And what you see is that the increase of the value of those higher degree is even faster. It's the value of those higher degree is basically skyrocketing over the period. This is in percentage. Let's look at this in dollars. This is the present discounted value of the college, lifetime value, relative to high school degree. Note that this is net of tuition. You might have read lots of things about US university becoming crazily expensive and students being killed by huge amount of debts. Well, net of tuition, you see this incredible increase, and the net value of a net value of acquiring college education on average is $600,000 in 2010. So it's certainly worse, even though the cost of acquiring an education has been increasing a lot, it's one of the best investments that you can make. Of course, there is a caveat. It's a very good investment, provided that you get the degree. And there is a significant fraction of kids that register into university, pay the tuition for at least 2 years, but never get the degree. And those are the people who end up with all the cost of the higher education, i.e., in many cases, a huge debt, but none of the benefits because they don't have the degree. And I think the problem of student debt is mostly those people. Okay, this is until 2010. This is now what you have here is a different scale. This comes from the book by Claudia Goldi, now recent Nobel laureate, and Larry Katz. And this gives you an historical perspective. Now, the college wage premium is here. Forget about this kind of irregularity here. There are some data problem. But what you see is that the value of human capital as measured by the college premium was very high at the beginning of the 20th century, declined a lot until the war, and then start climbing up again. And now it's pretty much at the same level as in the past. Of course, one has to be extremely cautious when making this kind of comparison. Because the people here are completely different from the people there. Back in 1910, the people with a college education were a very small elite, whereas now it's something like 1/3 of the population. So there is a lot of composition effect. But at least what we see here is that in terms this is a Piketty-like diagram, except that Piketty, it was financial wealth or financial income of the top 1%. Here what we see is the impact of education. And remember that now the percentage of educated people is a very significant fraction of the population. Let's look now at the very recent evolution. And this is something that I was alluding to earlier. This has been going on between essentially 1980 and 2010. And we see the end of this trend here in this 2010, 2012. But starting in the tens, what we see is essentially a plateauing of this college premium, if not a slight decline. And actually, the COVID has created a slight decline. So this kind of increase in the value of education, it's a story that was completely valid between 1980 and 2010. Now the story seems to be different. And I'll come back to the explanation for this plateauing of the social mobility, which I think is even more important than static inequality. Think of the American dream. The American dream is something like, my life is terrible, but that's the price to pay for my children to have a much better life than mine. And that's very deeply anchored into the kind of social myth that are the foundation of the US society. Actually, one narrative about the level of inequality in the US is something like, yes, there is a lot of inequality in the US. There is more inequality in the US than in many European countries, for instance, but that the price to pay for social mobility. The US is a land of opportunity in the sense that it's a country in which even if you're coming from a very underprivileged background, you can make it to the top, and you can make it to the top much easier, much more easily than in European countries. Now, in order to represent that, I'm going to present you a graph. Let me first describe what the graph will be. On the horizontal axis, I have income inequality measured in the usual sense. When you go to the right, you have very unequal distribution at a given moment. And when you go to the left, you have the more equal countries. On the vertical axis, we have intergenerational mobility. But the way to read this diagram is the higher you are, the less mobility there is. One way of measuring intergenerational mobility is to look at earning elasticity. So essentially the question is, if I know the income of the parents, how much does it tell me about the income of the children? In a very mobile society, the answer is not much. And therefore, a very mobile society will be here in the bottom of this graph. On the other hand, if you think of a society that's socially frozen, in which essentially if the parents are wealthy, the children will be wealthy. If the parents have a high income, the children will have a high income. Then it would mean that the income of the parents is a very good predictor of the income of the children, meaning that the number will be high. So just keep in mind the fact that the higher you are, the less intergenerational mobility there is. Now, let me come back to my narrative. You know that they are the lens of opportunities, lots of inequality, but high social mobility. Well, we would expect those countries to be here. Lots of inequality, but high social mobility. And on the other hand, we would have the frozen countries in which there is less inequality, but this inequality doesn't move. That should be in the north-west part of the graph. So I would expect the countries to be located on something like a decreasing line. Well, let's look at reality. We see exactly the opposite. And actually what you see is that the United States, among those developed countries, not only are the United States the more unequal at any given moment, but the United States, with the United Kingdom and Italy, are also the countries in which social mobility is the lowest. There are lands of opportunities, and we see them. They're here. New Zealand, Australia, Canada. There is some inequality here, but the mobility is quite high. And of course, you got the Northern European countries, which are very equal and a lot of mobility. If you look at those numbers here, point 1, point 2, this basically tells you that you know the income of the parents. It doesn't tell you, it tells you very little about the income of the children. Okay, I don't have, so this is so much for the myth of the US as a land of opportunity. It might have been true at the beginning of the 20th century. And even then, I mean, it's not clear. There are discussions about historians in particular regarding the reliability of sources, but definitely it has not been the case for the last 50, 60, 70 years. I don't have human capital here. So let me now introduce human capital into this graph. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the vertical axis exactly the same, but on the horizontal axis, instead of income inequality, I will put college premium. So on the right-hand side, I will have the countries in which the fact that you have a university education is very important, has a huge impact on your wages, whereas on the left-hand side, I will have the countries in which human capital, or at least education, university education, are not that important in terms of wage determination. This is this graph, and you see that it's pretty much the same graph as before, with one exception, Italy, which is here. So I'm not going to talk about Italy, but that's an interesting case. But otherwise, you got exactly the same kind of story. And this points in a very clear direction, which is those countries in which there is very small social mobility, they are precisely the country in which education makes a huge difference, simply because the one thing that transmitted from the parents to the children is education, is human capital. And that will be essentially a driving force for what I'm gonna say next. It's not you, of course, right? For those people familiar with French sociology, that's what Pierre Bourdieu used to call reproduction. But when you look at the data, it's very striking that the country, the United States, where education is so important and where the value of education has increased so much, is also the country, one of the countries with United Kingdom, in which the social mobility is the lowest. Okay, I've been talking about economics. Let me talk about non-economic aspects. You know, economics, when you're saying the GDP is larger, productivity is larger, wages are higher, you always got people saying, yes, but is it a good measure of welfare? Is it so clear that you're more happy when you're wealthier? Maybe we should reduce consumption and so on and so forth. The one thing I like with life expectancy is that this is totally unambiguous. We all agree on the fact that the longer life expectancy is good. So let's see the evolution of life expectancy over time. This is a graph that I constructed. I took the United States, they're in blue, and 3 European countries, Germany, France, and Italy. This is between 60 and 84. The increase here, now this graph, of course, is well known by all the people working in life insurance or reinsurance know this diagram. Over the period, there is a huge increase in life expectancy. This is really remarkable. I mean, if you look at this graph, the gain in life expectancy is something like 3 months each year. Each and every year, the average life expectancy at birth has been increasing by 3 months, which is really amazing. Again, there are very few examples in history of an evolution of that type. And what you see is that, again, all the countries are pretty much following the same trend. France is above, Germany is at the bottom, Italy and the United States are in the middle. But, you know, there is a kind of a common trend that's clearly visible. And then starting in the 80s, when this explosion of inequality takes place in the US, here is what happens. And what's very striking is that the US are losing the trend. There is this kind of breakdown, discontinuity in the trend. All of a sudden, the trend of increasing life expectancy in the US is much lower than in the other countries. Now, the same graph concentrating on 1980 and 2020, this is in the recent paper by Ann Case and Angus Deaton, and they're using a very large number of countries. So Japan is at the top, France will be there. One thing that's sort of striking is that take Portugal. The per capita GDP of Portugal is about 1/3 of the United States. Yet, now, I mean, in 2020, the life expectancy at birth in Portugal exceeds that in the US by no less than 3 years. And that was before COVID. If you add up the COVID impact, COVID can be seen in basically all countries. In all countries, we see a reduction in life expectancy. But in Japan, it's 2 months. In France, it's 3 or 4 months. In the US, it's no less than 3 years. Now, again, those are raw data. What about human capital? Still in the paper by Ann Case and Angus Deaton, this is the same graph for the US, but distinguishing between college graduate and non-college graduate. And what you see is that essentially, if you just, in the previous graph, if instead of putting the US, I was putting the graduated, the educated part of the US, the trend would have been exactly the same as in the Western countries. The loss is completely concentrated on non-college graduates. And note 2 things. First of all, the plateau and actually the decrease in life expectancy is much older than COVID. It started about 10 years ago. And the loss, the number of years lost to COVID is more than 3 years. Now, how do we explain this? This is another graph by Case and Deaton. This is in their book, Death of Despair and the Future of Capitalism. What they do is they compute the total number of death linked to drug, overdose, alcohol, or suicide. And they call that death of despair. And what you see is that there's been an explosion of those deaths. And this explosion is completely concentrated on uneducated people. For educated people, there is a very slight increase, but really nothing significant. Whereas for in particular, and it's not concentrating on the very young, right? The most impressive increase is between 30 and basically essentially 60 years. It is this very clear trend. Again, we see the impact of education in life expectancy. Children development. That's my last slide on those in this series on human capital and inequality. This is a very disturbing slide. If faint-hearted people should not look at this slide, it's a medical study in which those guys are doctors in a pediatric unit, and they have been following kids, a sample of a few hundred kids, and they have been looking at the development between the age of 5 months and 3 years, and they have made measures. The kids have taken regular MRIs, and they have measured the size of the brain and the size of specific location of the brain, in particular the frontal gray matter and the lateral gray matter. Now, if you look at the size of the brain, the evolution of the size of the brain is the same for everyone. But if you look at the frontal gray matter, and you classify the kids by the wealth or the social economic status of their parents, what you see is that at the age of 5 months, the size of the frontal gray matter is pretty much the same. And then you got those incredible evolution. The children coming from families with a low social economic background have a deficit of something like 20% in terms of volume. And you know, that's interesting because there's been a lot of tests trying to measure the IQ, the standardized test, and so on. Whenever you have a test like this, the question is, but what exactly are we measuring? What do we call intelligence? This is a physiological measure. This is the volume in the cubic centimeter of a crucial part of the brain. And you see this incredible divergence between kids from different backgrounds. If I wanted to summarize the drama of the evolution in the US, that's one of the evolution of inequality in the US. That's one graph that I will choose. Okay. Third, briefly, some perspective on urbanization and growth. There has been a lot of studies devoted to cities. Why do we have cities? Why is it that people congregate in cities despite the pollution, the congestion, the very high price of real estate, and so on and so forth? And the answer to that in general is cities have huge comparative advantage in terms of production, in particular in terms of skill production, in terms of high added value production. Now, one thing, this graph is from a book by Ed Glaser. There is a very clear positive correlation between the size of the city and the GDP produced, or the GMP, since we're talking about metropolitan areas. So the larger cities are more productive, and we see this very clear trend. This has been recognized by the literature for many years. The second trend is urbanization. Large cities tend to attract skilled labor. What you have here is the you have on the horizontal axis is the density. So on the right-hand side of each axis, you got large cities. On the left-hand side, you got rural areas. And what you have here on the vertical axis is the share of the workforce, either who are either high school dropouts, those are the red dots, or who have a college. Now, first of all, in 70s, there were many more high school dropouts than college, and this has been inverted now in 2015. You got more college-educated people than high school dropouts. That's not surprising. Second thing, there is a positive gradient in the sense that skilled people are more likely to be in large cities. And that was the case in 70, it's the case in the 19, still the case in 2015. But the gradient is completely different. The difference between the rural areas and large cities back in 70 was not huge. We were moving from 0.9 to 0.13. Now we're moving from less than 20% to more than 40%. There has been this huge concentration of educated people in large cities, whereas we don't see any kind of similar change of trend for the dropouts. This is in terms of education. If you look at type of jobs, low skill, mid skill, high skill, you got exactly the same story. If you look at the wages, you got exactly the same kind of story. So something that's in the background and that's very strong is more and more educated people tend to concentrate within large urban areas, and they go to the Silicon Valley, they go to San Francisco, they go to New York, they go to Boston, they go to Atlanta, or there are some hubs here for production, and those places are becoming more and more productive. Now, what's interesting is that if you look in political terms and you want to understand the vote in the US, this gives you a very interesting insight. What you have here, this is a paper by the Brookings. You take all the electoral districts and you divide them between the Democrats and the Republicans, depending on whom they elected. You have to read that with some caution, because of course the Democratic district in 2008 needs not be the same as the Democrat district in 2018. We're just adding up whichever district elected the Democratic candidates as opposed to Republican candidates. Now, what we use, what you're doing is we're looking at the GDP per district, and you realize that the GDP per district in the Democratic leaning has been increasing a lot. It doesn't mean that the Democratic districts were becoming more productive. It means that probably the opposite, that more and more of the districts that were developing very quickly with a huge development of modern technology and the huge inflows of very skilled workers have tend to become more and more democratic. And by the way, that's something that you see a lot in the US in general. Big cities vote Democrat. Even in Texas, which is a red state, most, I think, 6 out of the top 7 cities have a Democrat mayor. And if you do that per capita, you see exactly the same story. The per capita income has increased a lot in Democratic. So we're in a situation, and of course, this is linked a lot with education. If you look at the top left of the graph here, this is the percentage of vote going to the Democratic candidates for each presidential election. And what you see is that until the late 1990, early 2000, there are fluctuations. So for instance, what you see here, this low level of vote for Democrats, those are the Reagan areas, the Reagan years, whereas Clinton will be there. But there was no significant difference between high and low education counties. But starting in the late 1990, we see that the high education counties tend more and more to vote on the left, and the low educated counties tend more and more to vote to the right, to Republicans. And here you got this in 5 states. Of course, those are not randomly chosen states. Those are swing states. that will play a key role, that play a key role in each election. And we see exactly the same story on those stuff. Okay, let me give you a very simple supply and demand story to try to explain why is it that starting in 1980, the value of human capital has been going up a lot. Now, let me start with the demand for human capital, the demand for skilled labor as opposed to unskilled labor. There has been huge changes in 1980, and the determinants, everybody agree on the determinant. There may be some discussion of the respective importance, but technical progress, the fact that many unskilled jobs have been replaced by machine. But of course, if you have machine, you need a lot of skilled job to produce the machine, to produce the software, to maintain the machine, and so on and so forth. In addition, you got an international trade, essentially because some of the unskilled job has been outsourced to Asia. And then there are other determinants, unions, and so on and so forth. Let me just make one point here, which is a point that I like to make. Of course, this is probably not the right audience, but from time to time, it comes back an old myth in economic development, which is that technical progress kills employment. Now, for the French people in the audience, you might remember a book that was extremely successful in France, I think in the late 90s. It was called L'Horreur économique. And it was a book that was explaining that the progress will essentially kill employment and we're moving to a society in which there will be no more jobs. What was completely surrealistic in the success of this book, and the book was well written, but what I found very striking is that there was exactly zero relationship between this book and reality. Now, if you look at this diagram here, this is the evolution of the total number of jobs in the US since the war. So this period here has been a period of huge economic progress, huge innovation, huge technical progress. And the number of jobs has increased, mostly because the population has increased, by the way, right? But there are two trends here, the increase in the population and the fact that the labor force participation of women has been increasing a lot over this last part. But you know, if you look at the number of jobs in the US now, comparing that to the 70s, it's pretty much the double. So this notion that, you know, technical progress will kill jobs, that's a complete nonsense. What's true is that technical progress will kill some jobs and will promote some other jobs. At the end of the day, the total will be an increase in the total number of jobs, but there will be some replacement. And to illustrate this replacement or this displacement, this is a graph that I like a lot. It's by the economist David Autor from MIT. He did that in 2014. So he takes all the jobs in the US. And since some jobs are part-time, some jobs are full-time, he takes the number of hours worked in the US. And he asks what fraction of those hours require a college degree. Back in 64, it's less than 20%. In 2012, it's more than 50%. Now, the bottom line here is on the demand side, there is a huge demand for skilled work from the productive sector. Now, you know, demand and supply, there is this huge increase in demand. What about supply? Let's look at supply. So let me start with the US. This is the evolution of, this is a graph that we constructed in a paper that we published something like 15 years ago. You take any year, in any given year, you take the current population survey, and you take all men and women age 30 to 40. And you look at the percentage who have some college, which is essentially 2 years after high school, a college degree, that's some college is the solid line, some college degree is the dashed line, and more than college is the dotted line. Now, three things. First of all, women are in red and men are in blue. Women are more educated than men. And that's true in the US at each level of education, including at the highest possible level. By the way, this is absolutely not specific to the US. This graph gives you The same stuff for all countries in the world. You got developing countries on the left-hand side, you got developed countries on the right-hand side. The light blue is the percentage of women with a college education. The dark blue is the percentage of men with college education. Women are more educated than men in basically all developed countries. And even if it's not yet the case in developing countries, the trend is very significant. But the US is even more specific. And look at the box in red here. Now, we're talking about the period between the late 70s and the mid 2000s. This is a period on which we've seen that the value of human capital has been increasing a lot. The monetary reward to an investment into human capital has exploded. We're economists, we believe in incentives. The response should have been people, given that the value of education has increased, people should be more and more eager to acquire this education. And that's true big time for women. If you look at women, and they're at the top level, the MA, PhD, and so on, the percentage of women moves from something like 3% to 11%. Again, that's an absolutely huge increase. But we don't see anything like this for men. If anything, it's slightly declining, and even for the level of college, it's slightly declining. So on the supply side, there has been a response, but only a partial response, and a response which, at least until the mid-2000s, was concentrated on women. How could we explain that? We wrote several papers on this, and maybe I will have time to talk about this in the discussion. But at least things are changing. Those are data. See the difference between this and the previous graph, in that the previous graph was stopping here. And those are data that relate to the last 15 years. The increase of women, of the number of women with a bachelor degree continues. Now, it's 50% of women who have a bachelor degree, but now men are catching up. This flat period that started in the 70s and all to the mid seems to be over, and now we have an increase in the number of men with college degree. This small drop here is linked to COVID, but this is probably temporary. Okay, let me conclude. I've already spoken a bit too much, but let me very briefly mention family investment into human capital. Let me first give you a few stylized facts. Women are now more educated than men. I want to emphasize this because that's a very deep change, and this is a change, the consequence of this, including for the insurance business. We are there to last. They will be there for quite a long time, and it's absolutely fundamental. In addition, there is a strong, this is something that Philippe alluded to when we did his presentation, there is a strong preference for homogamy, particularly at the top. If you look at here, you take all couples by year of birth of the husband, and you put them in three categories. They have the same education. The husband is more educated and the wife is more educated. Same education, it slightly increases. But what's very striking is that now you have more couples in which the wife is more educated than the husband than the opposite. Now, this graph is also quite interesting, is the marriage pattern of white men who marry. So these are the men that have a college degree. That's the generation born in 1940, and then the generation born in 1970, 30 years later. This light blue here tells you, if you take all the men in this generation, in this cohort with a college degree, about a bit more than 25%, maybe 30% of them were marrying a wife who had a college degree. Most of them were marrying down. The proportion now is like 50%, which means in particular that we have many more couples in which both spouses have a college degree. For women, we see exactly the opposite pattern. There were very few women with a college degree, but they were very likely to marry a husband with a college degree. And in particular, if you look at this kind of level, either some college or so, those are the people who did something after high school, but not all the way to a college degree or a post-college degree. And look at this. Let me tell you a kind of one-sentence summary of what's going on. At that time, it was okay for a nurse. It was okay to be a nurse in terms of marital prospect because a nurse has a significant chance of marrying a surgeon. Now, for a nurse, forget about marrying a surgeon. There is just too much competition from female doctors. Now, this could explain why the demand for higher education has been increasing so much faster for women than for men. We tend to concentrate on one type of benefits of higher education, which are the financial benefits in terms of wage, so the benefits that are reaped on the labor market. But there is another types of benefits which are reaped on the marriage market. You don't marry the same person, and the allocation of resources within the household is not the same. And this is strongly asymmetric between men and women. I don't want to enter too much, but second general trend, general decline of marriages, mostly at the bottom. This is the percentage of men never married. This is amazing. If you look at the people who are high school dropouts, the black line here, 60% of them are unmarried, have never married. Never married means that they have never been married at the age of 40. That's absolutely. And you got the same, but much less for educated people. And for those people, it's mostly cohabitation. Here, it's completely different. Women, we got exactly the same trend. Something that's very specific to women. Back in the generation born in 1940, what you see is that having a degree was a clear handicap on the marriage market. Women with a high degree, like an MD or a low degree, were much less likely to be married, to be ever married, than other women. It's no longer the case. Actually, now if you continue for the next generation, the probability that you will get married will be the same as for college graduate and will be much higher than everybody else. Consequence of this, if you look at the number of children aged, this is from a beautiful book called Our Kids by Robert Putnam, who is a sociologist at Harvard. If you look at the number of kids aged 0-7 living in a single parent family, you got very few of them for parents with a bachelor degree, but a lot of them with parents with no more than a high school education. That's the third point, is a crucial point, and this is not something on which I've been doing a lot of research, but maybe we can talk about this during the discussion. Educated parents invest more into their children human capital, and this investment is more efficient. This is the time spent by parents on their children. This is the single parents non-college. This is married, but both are non-college, and this is married, both are college. Back in the 60s to 80s, everybody was spending pretty much the same time with children. Now, the educated parents spend much more time. And I have lots of data on this. It's true in any country. Educated parents spend much more time now than educated parents did 30, 40 years ago, and than less educated parents do now. Not only they spend more time, but they spend more money. And this is in terms of expenditures. When you look at total expenditures on commodities, it's not that different between educated parents and uneducated parents. But when you look at the investment into education and childcare, you see this huge difference between educated parents and uneducated parents. What we see is a massive investment by educated parents into the human capital on their children. In addition, the factors tend to be complementary, which might generate something that I call an inequality spiral. The inequality spiral will be something like this. Educated parents tend more and more to marry each other, and they tend to invest a lot into their children. In addition, not only they invest a lot, but their investments are extremely productive. When you look at the technology of human capital accumulation, there are lots of factors. There is the ability of the kid. And there is the input, the financial input by the parents, there is the time input by the parents, there is the schooling system, and so on and so forth. After the age of 10, let's say, these factors tend to be complementary. So a good school is good for everyone, but it's especially good for children coming from a good, privileged background. So we have a process in which the human capital, the educated parents spend a lot time and money into the education of their children, which means that the inequalities of opportunity become stronger at each generation. There is a well-known article in economics that starts with something like the most important decision you can make in your life regarding the future is the choice of your parents. The difference between children born in a well-off educated family and children born in less privileged social part of the society has been increasing for each generation. And this is something that's extremely difficult to fight. I'm basically done. Let me just mention two things. First of all, there is now this graph tells you what's the probability of graduating from college. What's interesting here is that this is still a book by Putnam. When you look at the grades that those kids had in middle school, in 8th grade, even the most gifted kids coming from the 25% families at the bottom of the distribution, even the smartest between them have less chances of graduating from college than the lowest part of the lowest kids in terms of grades in the richer families. However, there is a change, and the change is here. The change is this point here. What we see, if we look at the difference between 2005 and 2015, all of a sudden we have this huge increase in the percentage of college completion for kids coming from families that are not educated. So there will be a change. And just to conclude, this is something in which I deeply believe, and this is not my work, this is the work by Jim Heckman, my colleague and friend from my friend and former colleague from the University of Chicago, which makes the point that if we want to do something about inequality, we should do something very early in life, and the best possible intervention is during the first 5 years of the life of the children, targeting very specifically subpopulation coming from a socially disadvantaged background. And this is both fair and efficient. Technically, this is a period in which the various input, instead of being complements or substitutes. There is a lot of experiments that have taken place, both in the US outside. They are incredibly successful. Let me, just to conclude, quote Jim Heckman, the highest rate of return in early child development comes from investing as early as possible. I think if we want to be serious about fighting inequality, instead of concentrating on the top 1%, this is what we should be doing. And I've been a bit too long. Apologies for speaking too much. But, you know, people who know me know that I always speak too much. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Pierre-André. You don't speak too much. It has been a very fascinating presentation, stimulating presentation. Of course, we all have a lot of questions. Not sure everyone will be expressing his question. Let me look if in the conversation we have first some question, Pierre-André, and then we will ask people to the rest of the audience. We have a question which is from Albert Corina who says, I believe all statistics were from the US and some of them show a male-female comparison. I would have found a split by race also interesting. Are the corresponding data available?
Yes. So the answer is yes. and there is a literature on this. I've been working a little bit on race. Now, race in the US is different for many reasons. First of all, I was talking about the comparison between men and women, and I was saying, if you look at white people, it used to be the case that white males were more educated than white females, and now the trend has been reversed. Now it's the opposite. That's not true for Black people. And it's not true for Black people, essentially because we Black women have always been more educated than Black men, at least since the war. Even if you look just after the war, the percentage of women, of educated Black women is larger than the educated Black men. I remember discussing with Gary Becker about race, and he was telling me, people often speak about the Black problem in the US. It's not a Black problem, it's a Black male problem. If you look at Black female, they are doing quite well. So the gender difference is completely different for the Black population. Hispanic are still another story. Just one final, there are literally hundreds of papers on this. So I'm not going to summarize all this, but if you look at this increase in the human capital, the Asian population stands out completely. I was saying that in the new generation, 40% of women in the general population have a college degree, but among Asians, it's more like 60% for women and almost 50% for men. So Asian have the demand for higher education has been increasing much more for the Asian Americans than for the white, and more for the white than both the Blacks and the Hispanics.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pierre-André. I have another question from Goodhart Tracy. She says, it seems undeniable that increased education predicts higher income, and you have shown women are generally more educated than men. Is it fair to conclude then that the fact that women continue to get paid less for the same work must be attributable to sociologic reasons rather than economic ones?
Excellent, very good question. Again, now I could speak for 2 hours on this. Let me just take, and actually, let me refer to the recent laureate of the Nobel Prize, Claudia Goldin, because Claudia has been working a lot on this. So, first of all, there is discrimination. Let's be honest. It used to be the case that a woman and a man making exactly the same type of job, the man was making more than the woman. It's less and less the case. If you try to look at the evolution, the pure discrimination, the fact that two identical persons are not paid the same depending on the gender, this has decreased a lot. What Claudia says, which I find fascinating, is in fact, men and women don't take exactly the same jobs, but it's extremely difficult to see because the distinction is at a very fine level. You will see both men and women be becoming doctors, for instance, but they will not take the same kind of specialization. The men will be more likely to be a transplant surgeon, and women will be more likely to be pediatricians or radiologists. Why that? Because, and it's exactly, I think, what the question is alluding to, on the side, there are social constraints, and there is a division of work within the household. And again, the division of work within the household has changed a lot. So men are much more active within the household, both in terms of taking part in the children's education and taking part in chores. Yet it's still the case that women spend much more time within the household, and more importantly, they are the ones who are more likely to need some kind of very regular offices, like hours of being able to pick up the kids at the end of school, being able to take the kids to the in the choice of the particular type of job that you take within a general profession, there are choices with women. Women tend to choose jobs that are less paid, but that allow them a better organization of their life. And this inequality is not on the labor market. This inequality is really within the family, which is a reason why you want to understand the male-female distinction. you cannot just look at the labor market. You need to look at what's going on within the family. And don't get me started with on the family. I've been working for 35 years on the family. Then you cannot stop me.
Sure, sure. Maybe it would be interesting, but we have Pierre-André other questions, and then we could come back to the family. Is one question of Bandele Kwame. He asks you, can you provide example in the real world where you have seen that early investments have produced large, I suppose in kids, have produced large benefits?
Let me go back to my screen sharing.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Very nice.
Those are, so there is there's been there have been a lot of experiments, but two of our particularly interesting. One is the peri-preschool program, and the other one is the abecedarian. So essentially, let me talk about the abecedarian. They took 111 children from low-income family in a very bad part of the U.S. You know, it's in a kind of a very kind of and underprivileged, poor background in a large city on the East Coast. And what they did is they randomized some of the children. They gave them some kind of nutritional supplement, but nothing more. And some children, they put them into preschool in which there was some kind of investment into interaction with the children, learning, and so on and so forth. You look at and this took place in 72, but they have been following those children even now. What you see is for the treated, and the choice between treated and control was randomized. So, you know, it's a perfect scientific experiment. And what you see is that among the treated children, the crime is much less. Drug addiction is much less. The income is larger. The probability that you will have a stable family and you will have children who themselves will live in a stable family are much, much higher. Not only that, but those benefits are transmitted to the children. So what we see now is that the children from the treated family are less likely to abuse, to have a substance abuse problem, less likely to go to jail, more likely to create themselves a stable family, and so on and so forth. So in particular, there is this very nice article by Jim Heckman and Gabriella Conti, John Campbell, published in 2014. But you know, if you just Google peri-preschool or abecedarian, and there have been other programs here, but it's remarkable. And what's interesting is not so much the people working on human capital distinguish cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills. Cognitive skills is something that knowledge, ability to process information, what we call IQ. Non-cognitive skills are more to do with social skills, you know, being able to show up on time, being able to control yourself, being able to argue reasonably instead of losing your temper, and so on and so forth. And the most important impact is on the non-cognitive skill. And the non-cognitive skill, if you look at the cognitive skills, you must intervene very early, and if you don't continue, those gains tend to be temporary, and in many cases they disappear. But the non-cognitive skill, they are there to stay. So, you know, just Google peri-preschool abecedarian, or another. The best advice I can give you, there is a site which is called the Heckman equation. Heckman being this guy here. The Heckman equation. You just Google the Heckman equation. You will have the website of Jim Heckman in which he's detailing this. It's absolutely fascinating. And by the way, this is for the US, but there are lots of work in developing countries which are extremely exciting too.
Thank you so much, Pierre-André. We have further questions which are arriving in a written form. I have Rosace Regina who asks you, I can tell you, it's a remark rather than a question. I can tell you that I am a physician in the US, and the men in my department with the same training were paid more than the women in the same specialty doing the same work the same hours. I see no comment on this point.
No. As I said, I will not say the discrimination is over. I think there is less discrimination now, gender discrimination, that used to be the case 30 years ago. But unfortunately, it's not yet over.
I have a further question from Gainer Philippa. She says, thanks for an interesting presentation. You showed some statistic around proportion of people graduating from college. If more people graduated from college in the future, is there enough space in the labor market for them? If the labor market stays as current, would a higher proportion of college graduates fitting into the same jobs as there are available at the moment result in lower returns from investment in college education? Of course, is a traditional labor market question, Pierre-André.
Yeah, and it's a very good one. So one thing that I cannot do and no one can do is predict the future in terms of technological progress. Now, what's true for the past is there has been a slight increase in the number of college graduates, but there have been on the supply side, but there's been a huge increase in the demand from the productive sector for college graduated people, which means that actually not only all the people who graduated from college could find a job, but the employers, some employers have a hard time finding the right people. There has been an increase in the immigration of skilled worker, and the more visible outcome is the increase in the college premium. I mean, the increase in the college premium, it's clearly that there has been some increase in the supply, but the demand has increased so much that the price has been driven up. What about the future? Let me tell you, in the past, what we've seen over the last 50 years is technical innovation was essentially replacing unskilled labor with machines and skilled labor. That it's a very crude description, but it's a good approximation. Will that be the case in the future? I don't know. It seems to me that the next revolution, which will be artificial intelligence and the kind of job that will be threatened might not be the unskilled job. It might be some skilled jobs, Let me give you two examples. Radiologist. Radiologist is a very skilled job, right? You need to be an MD, but what's the comparative advantage of radiologists is to look at very fuzzy picture and recognize patterns in those pictures. That's typically the thing that artificial intelligence does much better than humans. So, it simply doesn't mean that radiologists are there to disappear. It means that radiology will become interventionist radiology, and the radiologist will be someone who not only reads the picture, but also does some kind of intervention. But second example, I was with a friend of mine. We were having dinner, and he made the following experiment. He took his smartphone. He opens ChatGPT. ChatGPT is something that anybody can buy, right? You can buy a subscription. He asked the following question to ChatGPT: can you write a program in PyTorch that would construct a 3 layers neural network to study the function x sinus x? I saw the screen. The first response of the screen was, yes, of course I can, and then started the lines of code. We've been telling to kids, if you know how to code, you will be the king of the world. But it might be the case that most of the coding in the future will be done by artificial intelligence. And my friend told me it's not the smartest possible way of coding, but it's going to be correct. So the question is, what kind of job will we need in the future? And the answer is, we don't know. Look, I think there will be a demand. I think that the demand for educated people will keep increasing, but thankfully, with some luck, the supply will respond to that. What the goal of education might slightly change, and in particular, the point of education may be less acquiring a particular knowledge and more acquiring the ability to acquire new knowledge as needed when the technology changes. And I think that will be and that's something for us in the education business is something that we should take seriously into account. Flexibility is going to become much more important than it ever was.
Thank you very much, Pierre-André. And of course, you could have also referred to and pointed to the financial task inside companies, accountants, etc., conversion of accounting standards to other accounting standards. But we have three other questions, and we will stop, please. I think we cannot add further question. I have a question from Motala Mohammed, which has been completed by Albert Corina. Motala Mohammed says his observation finding concerning the fact focusing on the education of very young children before 5 years. He says his observation finding means that many people in emerging markets will have to be very lucky to change their futures and those of their children, unless there is a massive intervention by NGOs, governments across entire societies, countries. Are there been such a change in outcome fortunes that was implementing successfully anywhere? And Albert Corina I volunteer in an NGO related to paid scholarship and vocational training in Uganda. Part of the program is also kindergarten and artistic things such as theater for 8 years. Our kids make good money compared to their peers, even so all of our kids must have some sort of AIDS related issue. Either did parents or must be HIV positive themselves. This condition probably does not higher their chance by itself. Maybe worth adding that in my opinion, the money I pay for the college education of my kids is in no sensible relation to the money they make afterwards. I once did the math that just cashing them out leads to higher lifetime earnings than paying college. High school is different. Vocational training, cook, carpenter, has a good ratio. There are many questions, but we should focus on the question in emerging markets and if we have some results concerning emerging markets, Pierre-André.
Yeah, so there is a huge, and this is a very hot topic. There are lots of people working on intervention in developing countries. So there has been a lot of intervention by NGOs, by government, and the most efficient one being the cooperation between the government and the NGOs, trying to, now, the intervention I'm talking about are those addressing very young kids, right? Again, this is a very important literature. The thing is, A, it works, but B, it does not always work. So it's not that, whatever intervention you do, things going to be better. And we are in the process of learning exactly what should be done, what should not be done. And one of the main concern is scalability. If you want to spend a lot of money on a small number of kids, you can improve them a lot. That there is no doubt about this. But that's not very interesting because you're not going to spend a lot of money on each kid. So the question is, can we have relatively cheap interventions that could give you very good results? I was in the list that I had before. There is one of the precursor of this was Sally Grantham McGregor. Did an amazing job in Jamaica 50 years ago, and so there is a huge amount of work. It seems to work, but we are learning. It's not that everything works. We need to learn what's working, what's not working, and it seems to be possible to do that at a very low price. That's one of the conclusions of Heckman, that the social return is huge. If for each dollar that we invest, the return is $7, $8, $10. But he did the computation for the US. And it might be different, and each country is different. One thing that I learned working on developing countries is there is nothing like a one-size-fits-all answer. Each country is different. I'm sorry, I'm being quick. But
no. We will be perhaps shorter because we have not much time before the end. I have a question from Bruno Latourette. he says it seems that the structure of the family has been evolving with on average family being smaller. Would you confirm? Do you see a trend with well-educated people tending to have less kids? And if so, what does it mean in the long run?
Salut Bruno. Okay. First of all, yes, there has been a trend, obviously. There is and the shift is actually in the mid-70s. There is a poll, a survey, which is made by the Pew Center, that asks people what's the ideal size of the family. Before 75, the dominant answer is 4 or more. After 75, it's 2. And you got this complete reversal over a very short period of maybe 5 years. So yes, there has been a decrease in the size of the family. What Becker, the explanation of Becker was what he called quality-quantity trade-off. Essentially, people have less children, but they invest much more into the children, which makes sense. I mean, if really human capital is important, you may want to invest a lot onto your children. Now, regarding the link between education and size of the family, it used to be the case that educated people had less children. It's no longer the case. Now, I mean, at least in the US, what you see is that a wealthy family has exactly as many children as the less wealthy family. But they invest much more into their children.
Yes, we have the same observation in Europe and especially in France. I have a short question from Rosace Regina. She asks, has religion or faith been looked at?
Now, origin, what do you mean? Race or, faith, religion,
faith,
religion?
Yes. Do it influence the economic performance and the education performance?
The honest answer is I don't know. I've not seen a study in which the religion was making a difference, but that might be because in many data sets we don't have religion. So this one, the honest answer is I don't know.
Okay. I have, because we will close the webinar. Before that, I would like to mention 2 remarks. These are remarks and not questions. One from Jaspers Birger, who says, thank you very much for this comprehensive and truly eye-opening tour de raison. Important work and preliminary results to derive focused political measures such as higher public investments in preschools, kindergartens, etc., and resources for early warning, accompanying house visits to avoid leaving kids from some households completely behind, instead of blunt rises of social budgets for all. First remark, a remark from Jerry, who says, merci Pierre-André. Very interesting. Thank you, Jerry. And Goodart Frasse says, very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. Yes, I would like Pierre-André to conclude and to thank you. That we have learned so much from you and your presentation. We will have a lot of more questions to ask. Maybe if you need to ask some question, we can forward your questions to Pierre-André. Don't hesitate. In any case, I would like to thank you for this very and highly stimulating presentation, Pierre-André, and you have done it very soon in the US. And I apologize, but I hope everyone was very happy with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Oh, it was 8:30. It was not so early. I can survive starting to work at 8:30.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Pierre-André, bye-bye, everyone. And thank you for your audience and your participation. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.